Good morning, beautiful people of Earth. How are we all doing today? This warm weather has me in good spirit, and I might even be planning a trip with my friends from Minnesota, who are now scattered all across the country. Or they might come to me out east. Very early stages of planning, as in it was talked about once. Ooh, also, I learned that Barbra Streisand, acclaimed actress and singer, best known for her roles in 2004's Meet the Fockers and subsequent sequel Little Fockers, requests that rose petals be placed in her toilets on set, like in the water of her toilet bowl. Huh, the more you know. Did you also know Barbra Streisand was born the same year our story takes place, 1942. What a coinkydink. Today, I bring you the Fingerprint Genius. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from Crime and Investigation UK, the Marshall Project, USA Today, and the rest I will put down below. You may have heard parts of this tale I'm about to tell you, but I tried my best to approach it from a different angle rather than following the killer himself, or themselves, no spoilers. I attempted to follow the man essential to his capture, Frederick Cherrill. Cherrill was a pioneer of his era. According to TriviaLibrary.com, he was a portly and conservative man, rarely seen without his black derby hat. Frederick Cherrill was the head of the Fingerprint Department of Scotland Yard from 1938 to 1953. In his 39 years with the Yard, he solved more murders than any other detective of his era. He could glance at an inked pattern of ridges and whorls and tell you from memory the owner of the prints. As a young man, Cherrill studied painting and wood carving at art school. But while convalescing from an operation, he met a police officer who fired his earlier ambition to become a detective. In 1914, at the age of 22, Frederick Cherrill was appointed to the London Metropolitan Police Force. Between walking beats, he studied fingerprinting in its very, very early stages. Frederick Cherrill was intrigued by the fact that a man could be positively identified by the markings of a single finger. At the time, the chance of one fingerprint being identical to another was estimated at 1 in, I think it's septillion? I think that's right, septillion or octillion, way more than a billion. That was 6 years before Cherrill was assigned to the Fingerprint Bureau of Scotland Yard, and 10 years later, he developed what is known as the single fingerprint system, now in use all over the world. Quote, Superintendent Frederick Cherrill was, in fact, a pioneer finger and palm print expert and had already played an important role in the evolution of fingerprint forensics. Cherrill's genius was identifying single fingerprints at the scene of a crime, which at the time was difficult to undertake due to lack of expertise. But by 1942, the Met's Bureau of Records, through the efforts of Cherrill, had thousands of fingerprints on file, end quote. So when the body of 40-year-old pharmacist Evelyn Hamilton was found face up in the gutter on the chilly Sunday morning of February 8, 1942, Frederick Cherrill made absolutely sure he was one of the first to inspect the scene. Detective Sidney Birch, the on-scene investigator, had known Frederick Cherrill for years, and the two developed a close relationship, working side by side at Scotland Yard. According to Wikipedia, her clothes had been disarranged and her scarf wound about her head. Scuff marks on her shoes and broken sections of mortar scattered near her body indicated Hamilton had fiercely struggled with her attacker. The attacker had also raised her skirt above her hips, pulled her underwear below knee level, and exposed her right breast. Her handbag, containing approximately 80 pounds, had been stolen, although some of those contents were found strewn about the pavement outside a nearby air raid shelter. Hamilton's handbag itself was later found by a police officer on a nearby street. No fingerprints were recovered from any of her possessions, and her body was later identified by the landlady, Catherine Jones, on February 10th. Quote, Hamilton's post-mortem revealed that she had been manually strangled by a left-handed individual. She had not been sexually assaulted or mutilated, although numerous small cuts and scratches had been inflicted to her right breast, and a cut measuring 1 inch had been inflicted to her left eyebrow. End quote. Cherrill and Birch looked at each other after examining the evidence and theorized Hamilton was most likely the victim of a theft gone wrong. Unbeknownst to investigators, this would be the first murder in a string of killings which the likes of London hadn't seen in half a century. According to Crime and Investigation UK, London at the time was in the midst of mounting social pressure and a crime spike caused by austerity. From 1939 to 1945, crime rose by 50%, and an undermanned police force struggled to cope with this habitual looting and racketeering that was occurring in the city, as well as social problems arising from desperate and houseless citizens. The short of it, London was a criminal's paradise for the taking. Imagine Gotham City 80 years ago, and they had funny accents. Just over a day after the discovery of Hamilton's body, a scene of far worse violence was uncovered. On Monday, February 9th, the mangled body of 35-year-old Evelyn Oatley was found. Heads up, you might want to skip forward like 45 seconds if you get queasy at all. Quote, a young woman with ambitions to be in showbiz, Evelyn Oatley had been brutally assaulted, first by attempted strangulation before her throat was cut with a razor. The most grotesque and evil act on Evelyn Oatley was that while she was still alive and dying, he abused her body with curling tongs before continuing mutilation with a can opener. A torch was later found to have been inserted into her vagina. This wasn't just a murder on a pathological level, but the act of a psychopathic maniac who despised women. Leaving the can opener on display next to the body revealed a level of sadism not witnessed since the repulsive slayings of women on London streets almost 60 years earlier. Old Jackie Boy the Ripper. Perhaps due to this visceral nature of Oatley's attack, which involved sexual perversion and mutilation, it was not linked by police to that of Evelyn Hamilton's the day earlier, end quote. Which makes sense. Who would automatically assume one person killed two people in 24 hours under completely different circumstances? Evelyn Oatley had recently turned to sex work for additional money, which was not at all uncommon during the era. According to Crime and Investigation, sex work was an open affair during the war, and the exchanging of money for sex didn't become illegal until 1959. In the hard times of a war-torn city, touting for customers was far from subtle. These sex workers would often use torches to attract potential clients in the dark streets, devoid of any light, which suited both the street girl, or sex worker, and the client. But it was a dangerous occupation due to both a climate of desperation, poverty, and an increased number of men for which they had eagerly awaited these services. Fingerprint genius Frederick Cherrill spent hours meticulously scanning each piece of evidence found by Evelyn's body, until finally he located a single fingerprint on one of the murder instruments. He sent the fingerprint off for any possible matches and stayed behind further examining the crime scene. Frederick Cherrill's final deduction before calling it a day was that this assailant or attacker was also left-handed. Unfortunately, the print in question revealed no match in their database, but it was still a massive clue to behold. Again, within only 24 hours, a third slain victim was discovered. Margaret Florence Lowe, who had recently turned to sex work to pay for her daughter's school, suffered a death as cruel as Evelyn's. Quote, This frenzied attack revealed the victim had been strangled with a silk stocking. As well as suffering deep cuts to her thigh, her abdomen had been ripped open, exposing her intestines and her internal organs. As in the case of the second victim, Evelyn Oatley, the murderer had left a few of his tools behind, a knife and a razor lying on top of her body. One interesting clue, prints that were found on a candle that had been inserted into the victim's vagina, suggested again that a left-handed man had held the candlestick, end quote. So I suppose if he was holding the candlestick hard enough, you could see where the thumbprint was or the other fingers may have been. I don't know. Before investigators could finish processing the scene, it happened again. The following day, 32-year-old Doris Joannet, described as a, quote, bored housewife, was found strangled and mutilated in her ground floor flat. That is 4 days in a row, 4 women have been found and killed. Killed and found. The scene revealed immense similarities between Evelyn and Margaret's bodies, which we don't need to get into yet again. A whole slew of mutilation, organs, and blood. By this point, the media had grabbed a hold of the story and dubbed this monster the Blackout Ripper, due to the fact that all of his attacks occurred during nighttime blackouts because of World War II, remember? Apparently they couldn't have lights on at night, otherwise they would get killed. Oh, crikey. Quote, the broadsheets and the tabloids reveled in what was depicted as a latter-day Jack the Ripper, randomly striking without fear of being caught in the streets that, by law, had to remain in pitch darkness, end quote. Oddly, the day of Thursday, February 10th, passed without incident. There was a slaying on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Thursday, nothing. Maybe they were gearing up because... Well, that evening, 32-year-old Greta Hayward was approached by a man in a Piccadilly restaurant. He was offering to pay for sex, and despite her rejections, the man followed Greta down a nearby dark alley and pushed her up against a doorway. Greta struggled and fought against the attacker, but was struck in the head and knocked unconscious. Just as this man was about to perform a multitude of horrendous attacks, a torch held by an 18-year-old night porter shined into the doorway and prompted this attacker to run away. The porter, aware of the murdered women over previous days and an alleged serial killer in the media, brought this unconscious Greta and a mask the man had left behind to the police station. The police were of the mind that this was simply a case of common assault, not a connection to the week's killings. Thankfully, they still had the foresight to follow up. Left unsatisfied, the monster who previously ran away would try again that same evening. He convinced/paid Catherine Mulcahy to go back to her place for sexual relations, whereupon, again, she was attacked. Quote, the quick-thinking Catherine kicked him hard in the shins, prompting the attacker to stop, bizarrely give her another £5 note, and then run away. But, in his hurry, the maniac left behind a second clue in the form of his belt, end quote. While this all went down, police were doing their part with the mask from the first attack of the day. This mask in question looked like an old World War II gas mask, or at the time current. Nowadays you might see them turned into bongs. Either way, they knew it belonged to a soldier of some type. On the back, it said Royal Air Force Personnel, serial number 525987. Police contacted the RAF, or Royal Air Force Personnel, and learned that the mask was issued to Gordon F. Cummins. According to Wikipedia, Gordon Frederick Cummins was born in New Earswick, North Yorkshire, on February 18, 1914, the first of 4 children born to John Cummins and his wife, Amelia. School reports describe his academic performance as unremarkable, and teachers later recollect he was much more preoccupied with socializing than his studies. Same. At age 18, Cummins moved to Newcastle, where he briefly worked as an industrial chemist, but was dismissed from his job after only 5 months. And for years, he would work mid-level menial jobs on and off before being fired after a short period. Eventually, he moved to London, and while residing in London, Cummins developed a desire to live the life of an aristocrat. He frequented hotels and clubs in the West End, falsely claiming to acquaintances to be the illegitimate son of a peer and also claiming to receive an allowance from this fabled individual. He was trying to become a con man. He also frequently engaged in acts of theft or embezzlement to financially maintain this facade. After a failed aristocrat persona, in early of 1935, Cummins volunteered to join the Royal Air Force. He enlisted at the Aircrew Reception Centre in Regent's Park, London, and in May of 1936, he married a woman by the name of Marjorie Stevens. And there he would remain, a loyal husband and the loyal RAF member until his arrest on Saturday, February 14th, 1942. According to Crime and Investigation UK, when Cummins returned to the RAF Reception Centre at Regent's Park in the early hours of the morning, he was greeted by the police, who took him to the West End Central Station to be questioned about his whereabouts and the attack on Hayward. Charged with common assault, the police continued with their investigation of Cummins and discovered that in his quarters he had several incriminating articles, including an initialized pen, cigarette case, and a comb belonging to 2 of the victims found earlier that week. On the 17th of February, the day before Cummins' 28th birthday, the sadistic killer who had wrought such terror amongst London streets in less than 7 days appeared at the Bow Street Police Court to be charged with all 4 murders and attacks. When he was fingerprinted by Detective Cherrill, the fingerprint expert noted Cummins signed his name with his left hand. His trial began that spring on April 23rd, with the entirety of London holding their breath. Quote, Cummins' only defense was to try and discredit fingerprint expert Cherrill's testimony during the highly emotive trial. He continually stressed his complete innocence of the murders and raised the possibility that any RAF cadet could have taken out his gas mask from the reception center. But fingerprint evidence found at the second victim, Evelyn Oatley's flat, and also inside the retrieved gas mask, along with debris found in the respirator, all went to make the case against Cummins stronger. His fingerprints, once they had a match, were found at many of the locations. It took the jury only 35 minutes to deliver a verdict of guilty. Gordon Cummins was sentenced to death, and despite a campaign by a shocked and distressed family, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, to reprieve the death sentence, the man who had slain 4 women in the most vicious, obscene, and sadistic manner was finally hanged on June 25th, 1942. Gordon Cummins was executed by Albert Pierre Point at Wandsworth Prison. The entire execution process lasted less than 2 minutes. Cummins' execution was conducted during a German air raid upon London, and he is the only convicted murderer in British criminal history known to have been executed during an air raid. And that, my friends, is the story of Frederick Cherrill, the Fingerprint Genius, and the man known as the Blackout Ripper. Oof, that was a rough one, huh? Still, I hope you had some fun along the way. I truly don't want to bore anyone. Thank you all again for taking the time. If you did enjoy this episode, I totally wouldn't hate it if you left a rating. But stick around after the music for a bonus story, and I will see you guys later. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Hallo, welkoming for you Dutch listeners out there. Sorry if I afgeslaat or butchered the pronunciations. I just wanted to try something new. I found myself in an exoneration hole this week. Not the worst hole to be in. I had no clue the amount of exonerations that took place in 2022 and 2023 alone. Let me indulge you with 2 brief articles. Keep in mind these are not the full articles, but I do recommend checking them out. The first one, titled, "She Did 28 Years for Murder. Now this wrongfully convicted woman is going after the corrupt Chicago police," by Grace Hauk. Quote, "A woman who spent nearly 3 decades in prison for a murder she did not commit has filed a federal lawsuit against the Chicago PD and several individual officers, including a disgraced former detective accused of framing dozens of innocent people." The 13-count civil complaint filed Monday in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois on behalf of Marilyn Malero, 52, alleges that Detective Ronaldo Guevara and Ernest Halverson and other officers engaged in a, quote, "number of unconstitutional and egregious acts," and coerced a false confession from Marilyn Malero. She is one of at least 38 people exonerated after being convicted on murder charges due to the misconduct of those officers. Collectively, get ready, the innocent men and women have served more than 800 years behind bars. In May of 1992, Malero was 21 years old with 2 young children. She was in a park on Chicago's west side when another woman shot and killed 2 people. Malero did not participate in the shooting or have any knowledge that they were going to occur. Yet, Malero was subjected to brutal and unconstitutional interrogation tactics. To force confession, she was told she would receive a lethal injection if she did not confess. According to the complaint, the officers did not provide Malero with access to a lawyer, used psychological torture, manipulated and coerced purported witnesses into providing false statements, promised leniency to jailhouse informants in exchange for false testimony, and manipulated lineups and identifications. They did everything. In 2020, after investigations and lawsuits uncovered evidence that Guevara, Halverson, and other officers had framed dozens of people, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker commuted Malero's sentence and she was released from prison. In 2022, a Cook County judge granted motions filed by the state attorney Kim Foxx to dismiss all charges against Malero. She was the first Latina woman ever sentenced to death in Illinois, the first woman to be exonerated in a Guevara-related case, and she's the first and only woman exonerated from death row in Cook County, Illinois. End quote. So very happy to see she is out, but oh my god, there's so many of them. And that Guevara character, there's dozens of articles out there, but I believe it's 11 people last year filed a lawsuit against him alone. It's both happy and sad, frustrating, but I'm glad that there's improvements. The second snippet deals directly with attorney Kim Foxx, as mentioned above. This comes from the article, "In 2022, exonerations hit a record high in the U.S., written by Jamilez Lardy. Quote, "Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx has had plenty power throughout her time in office, and she has used it. Cook County, home to Chicago, has now led the country in exonerations 5 years in a row. Indeed, Cook County accounted for about half of 2022's record number. That's largely due to Fox's efforts at tossing convictions tied to corrupt cops who extorted money from and planted drugs and guns on residents of the city's Ida B. Wells housing projects, virtually all of whom were black, for nearly a decade. Since 2017, 212 convictions tied to the officers have been overturned. Quote, victims and their families will never be made whole, Foxx told USA Today, but there is something that's owed to them, end quote. Which is amazing. She's been doing, I don't want to say God's work, but she's been doing some real good work out there. I just wish those people like Kim Foxx didn't have to fight so hard against 10 times the amount of people that are fighting back at her. It just goes to show how corrupt the justice system and individual power-hungry police officers have been in the past, over the years, in the present, and will continue to be. If I lied on an application, I would get fired. One man, this Guevara dude, framed dozens of people for murders, and he wasn't even scolded until after his retirement. Oh my days. I hope hell exists solely for people like him. Well, now that I'm all worked up, you lot have any questions? I am plumb out of written words. Thank you all again for sticking around, and please have yourself an exquisite day. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.